So this is let's make Drupal core less complicated. I feel like I should have said parentheses not small core because maybe that's what people are expecting. So yeah, I'm Ted Bowman. I'm Ted Bow on Drupal.org and Twitter. Principal software engineer at Acquia, co-maintainer of Layout Builder and Settings Tray. I'm part of the Acquia Drupal acceleration team. These are lists of things we do. I'm involved a lot in the stuff in blue. I help with Layout Builder. I help with the REST module for the API first stuff when I first started working here. Occasionally work on security issues, not too often. And I'm going to be starting working on automatic updates, which I'm excited about. So I saw other people do this in chat. Start with Q. I'm going to be a rebel and say start with 4 Qs. So this is an example question that I would hopefully find easy in the chat because it has 4 Qs. Isn't Drupal already simple? So if you have questions like that, if anybody has this particular question, then the answer is no, but I'm assuming not. Okay, so let's make Drupal less complicated. Pretty easy, right? Small task. In the 45 minutes here, you all should be really excited that Drupal is going to be just simple after this session. I think there's maybe a core committer or two in attendance, and I have a huge patch that they're just going to commit after this. Actually, not quite, but here's some ideas. So first of all, I'd like to acknowledge that Drupal 10 is coming, and there's a lot of stuff we have to do and some stuff we want to do. So some of these ideas for making Drupal less complicated can't really be done before Drupal 10. Some of these ideas aren't really, are sort of adjacent to core, so they're not necessarily like dependent on the core cycle, so they won't be affected by that timeline. And also I'd like to acknowledge that Drupal is just going to be complicated. Drupal's flexibility and extensibility is what sets it apart from other systems, and we don't want to lose that. And because it's trying to handle many different use cases, it's just going to be complicated. We're just not going to get rid of that. Drupal has already many complicated use cases built on top of it. These are some distributions, like Drupal Commerce. We have Contenta, which is a decoupled CMS. We have government websites built on Drupal, like government platforms built on Drupal, education platforms built on Drupal. Then, of course, there are all the individual complex sites, or even software as a service that is built on Drupal. And at this point, it's too late to remove a lot of core functionality because hundreds of platforms and hundreds of thousands of sites are depending on them. But what's wrong with complexity? And this is not going to be like a really code-heavy talk. It's sort of just like a ideas talk and some sort of things I've been mulling over. So many parts of Drupal have, let's not call it a bus factor, but they're really endangered if a few people decide they no longer are interested in Drupal. So maybe they have I found my calling factor. So if you want a few core developers decide they want to go out on the road, join a band, and yeah, we'd be in trouble in certain areas. So how many of us understand stuff like routing, form API, config translation, entity API, type data? A lot of us, I don't fully understand all of this stuff. Sometimes I understand this stuff, and then I don't use it for a year, and then I come back and then I don't understand it. So I saw this in other sessions where they do the little poll. So how many people feel like they understand how to use, so not how necessarily it works, but how to use these, and sort of reply with the letters that you understand. So A for routing, B for form API, C for config translation, D for so you can read the rest. It's A, B, D, getting a lot of A. A and B and D seem to be popular answers. Somebody answered C. It went by really fast, but oh, Gabor. Gabor only understands C. I don't believe that, but okay. All right. How many of you understand how these systems actually work under the hood? All right. It's going slower now. Okay, but we still do have some answers. We may have a weighted audience here that a little bit different than some. I probably wouldn't On a good day, I might, answer a few of these as yes. I might at one point have answered type data. I'm not sure if I would have answered type data now. I think a lot of stuff, my guess in this was sort of like routing. A lot of people would understand. It comes from another system. We use it a lot. The form API. I feel like a lot of people obviously understand how to use it, but the inner workings, I think when you really like get down into it is very confusing. Config translation for me, I've only had, or this actually didn't get committed to core, but I attempted to do config translation for layout builder, and it really just kind of like blew my mind. It's still not done. Inch API, I think it's complex, but people have to use it a lot, so I think a lot more people understand it. And type data, I feel like not a lot of people understand it, and not a knock on anybody. It's just a really complex system trying to do a really complex thing. When I was working on the REST module, when I first started work at Acquia, we worked with type data a lot, and I really felt like at some point I understood it, pretty much, not completely, but to prepare for this session, I decided to step debug through just getting like the value of node body. And it really kind of just like my head exploded. It sort of reminded me like, oh yeah, this is really, really complicated. What's going on in the hood just to get one particular property off a particular field. And so I know I'm not supposed to use videos, but it's not really, I don't think this is, oh, I guess I won't. I can't do it in presenter notes. So this is, you don't have to actually see what's going on, but the idea here is I was stepping through just that line there, and I was trying to skip over like everything that had to do with the cache system or the database system. So this is me sort of going through and only kind of stopping time lapse over 4 days. Kind of. And so I actually kind of cheated because I had gone through this a few times to get ready for this. So it probably took me a lot faster. So kind of just going through the type data and into the API system and trying to not go through any of the rest of it. And it still like took me forever. And so it just sort of reminded me of how complex this system is. It's one of the more complex systems in Drupal. So I think we're coming up onto the end of the video. I hope it wasn't too bad. If the video cut out for you, it's basically me step debugging and keep going and going and going, and just basically not stopping and going through tons of different parts of Drupal. I have to find my notes view again. I heard you like abstractions and the abstraction. Okay, I definitely, if you're interested in doing that, it's actually like you actually can learn a lot by going through there. But the REST module, because we were, on an API level, updating fields, retrieving fields, we had to do that a lot. But working with stabilizing the REST module, it wasn't experimental, but we're kind of stabilizing things in 2016. When we hit a bug or something we didn't understand in type data system, we had to be really careful. And often if we had a really tricky issue, there was like 1 or 2 people that we felt like we needed to talk to, or we wouldn't be confident when we really understood the issue. I remember, for example, when we were in Vienna, I think this actually had to do with like config validation, which is still not done. I remember we were so excited in Vienna because we would be able to sit down with a particular contributor and finally unblock this issue that had been stalled for months. And, we just, I guess, until this person chimed in, we just didn't feel confident to actually make the change. But our type data system is really is not just complicated for no reason. It creates a introspectable type system for a content model that can be dynamically created or changed through the UI. That's pretty amazing, and allows us to do really cool things like create dynamic documentation for our REST and JSON API modules on a detailed property level. This is a screenshot of the Open API module on maybe JSON API or REST. Also stuff like rules potentially could use this. Anything that really needs to like find out like what types your data should be. With Drupal's emphasis on API first and decoupled sites, we don't want to remove this kind of ability. So what can be done? With something like type data, there really don't seem to be great options. We could leave it like it is, which honestly seems like the most likely thing that's going to happen. But as we get further away from when we created it, we are likely to lose more people that know the internals really well, lose them from the community. And either way, either they won't have time for core, or they'll move on to other pursuits, or we won't lose them, but they'll just forget how it works, like a lot of us. We could document it better. It's the foundation of our entity system, but still doesn't have complete documentation. Finally, we could totally rebuild it. Even if our entity API is built on it, not a lot of modules outside of core interact with it directly. Though the ones that do are pretty powerful and essential. So it could be a question of disturbing a few modules, but those modules also having a ripple effect through contrib. So commerce is one of the things we're sort of thinking of here. We could also rebuild it with totally different assumptions. For instance, instead of having a dynamic type system, we could instead use the entity and field configuration to precompile bundle level classes that would have information about their fields and properties, so that if you actually stepped through documentation, spoiler alert. So that actually wasn't my idea, the one about doing the precompiled classes. It was something I was chatting with Alex Pod about, so I don't want to take credit for that. But I like the idea, but it is probably, rebuilding it seems impossible given our time constraints, definitely for Drupal 10. Something we could think about that afterwards if we still have problems, or still sort of the complications might lead to problems. One reason to rebuild it may be that, now that PHP has changed, so we're sort of reading the reasons for the type data system in the existing documentation, and it sort of was trying to get away from some of the lack of strong typing in PHP. And some of that has changed, so we could potentially look at it either for a rebuild or for changes that might take more advantage of PHP 8 and beyond's capabilities. Okay. I think really actually what is more likely is that we need better documentation in this case. So I know better documentation seems like an anticlimactic suggestion for a session about making core less complicated, but I think with Drupal core, we're often left in a situation where we can never take away functionality, and we never have the time and resources to rebuild the existing functionality with the pressure to move forward. I'm just going to scroll the chat. Yeah, so I don't think rebuilding necessarily implies broken. It just maybe implies that if you started from scratch, you could make it a whole lot simpler, especially with what we know of it now, and also with language changes. I see their questions without the 4 Qs. Just kidding. I'll try to find them anyways. But feel free to retype them if I miss them, which I'm not actually taking questions at. So I'll scroll through. Questions. Can I actually do the find for the 4 Qs? Q. Like this. What are the 5 Qs? Okay, so just questions about the Qs so far. So the Qs are very well with the, how hard would it be to plug in something different, override? I assume that was for the type data. I think it would be really hard to do. And I don't necessarily think we would, so I don't think it's a reasonable, like given unlimited time and resources, I think it'd be a great thing to do. But, but given like realities, I don't think it's possible. I will ignore Sally's question because she only used 1 Q, but next time. Are they not the best peanut gallery? Indeed they are. Okay, so I'm back on the slides here. Okay, so one concrete step we could take would be to require all modules and underlying systems to have their own README files. I know there's been a lot of progress on user-facing handbook documentation, but it might be better for developer documentation to live inside the code base. This documentation could focus on those that would like to help maintain the module and those that want to consume the APIs. Our current system of module or system level documentation relies on .api files, which were created when the hook system was the main API for modules. So this is an example. I'm going to pick on something that I was involved with. I can't take credit for the type data system, and even though I was saying how complex it was, I would definitely be bragging if I had made it. This is an API.php file for the layout builder module, which I'm the co-maintainer of. The only information here is about layout builder access, which is important. But if you're a new developer who wanted to help out with layout builder, or hypothetically, you are the maintainer of a co-maintainer of this module and wanted to remind yourself of the architecture, this wouldn't really be much help at all. This also wouldn't be much help for the contrib developer who wanted to extend layout builder. You might get the impression that the only API that layout builder module exposes is around this access issue. There's no mention, for example, of content blocks and how we interact with the block content access control handler to connect block access to layout access. And also there's no mention of section storage plugins or how or why you might want to implement them. And that's probably one of the sort of biggest features of the API for layout builder. I'm gonna scroll. Okay, no 4Qs, all right. Okay, so this is the top level builder, the top level, the layout builder source folder. As an experienced module developer, you may be able to look at the module and figure out eventually how it works, but it's very difficult and there's no quick architectural overview. If I was looking to extend layout builder, there's nothing guiding me to focus on section storage, for example. Although I'm glad we have moved away from our API just being hooks, the API.php files did give the developer a single place to look for how they could alter the behavior of the module. There's nothing that has replaced that. You could look through all the code and eventually understand the module, but honestly, you don't need to know most of it. And if you want to make them add the functionality to layout builder. So I think with sort of just relying on the code itself for documentation, you kind of have to filter through a lot of stuff that if you wanted to be the maintainer of the module would be like really important. But if you actually just wanted to make a module that extends layout builder is maybe not so important. All right, I'm looking for my cues again. Move readme to docs folder, auto build static site. Yeah, definitely. If we had the readme, it doesn't preclude getting that documentation out onto the web like most projects I think now do. Readme minus. Maybe haven't found it to be helpful. Okay. All right, so let's go on to, this is the JSON API module API.php file. I think this is a good example of providing high-level documentation in the module. We may have a maintainer of the JSON API module in attendance here. Gabe, mic drop. I should have done like a Git history on this before the presentation to see. Maybe Gabe wasn't even involved in this part, but he probably was. Although in the future, it'd be great if we could move more of these out of the API.php file. So I think the documentation is great, but for most of the documentation that I saw in there, besides the hooks stuff, there's not really any reason it needs to be in an API.php file except for historical reasons. So this is another example. This is not, this is a text file. I've been looking at the readmes from the new composer folder. I think these are also really good overviews and examples of what we could start to put in other parts of core. So we just looked at a couple of those in core under the composers folder, and I thought they were definitely a lot better overview than we have in most of our systems. And that's, it may be a case of these are new systems and we're just sort of getting better at this, but I think this kind of stuff is important. So README. Okay. So for the new, I feel like I should like back up to the previous slide, but for new people, the 4 Qs for a question. So if you have Q, I'll find your questions better. So yeah, the read, I would think that the README files in core would be more for developers than actual like site builders, but I think we already have different documentation for site builders and developers, which is, I don't think, a bad thing. Okay, so let's look at, I feel like I skipped some slides here. Okay, anyways, we'll come back if I did. Let's look at backwards compatibility in our internal API. So our BC policy and deprecation policy, I think, were a big success in making Drupal 9 the easiest major version upgrade ever. I think it was an understandable policy, and we created tools to help people analyze and fix their contrib and custom code. This allowed that 95 out of the top 100 modules to be Drupal 9 compatible on day one. Yeah, I'm just tooting my own horn. This is the whole reason for this session. Okay, but related to our deprecation, we also have this @internal annotation to mark code that is considered an API to try to reduce our external API surface. But practically, because of the pain of previous minor updates in core to contrib modules, we've had to institute a deprecation policy for our internal API. So really, this makes this pseudo internal code. It's not the best situation, but it's the reality of what we have to do right now. So basically, you might think if like our internal code was completely internal, we wouldn't really have to worry about deprecating stuff because we would expect no calls from outside of Drupal itself. But it's just not the reality of how it works right now. We are starting to make more of our internal classes final. This is an example of actually just a patch to make something final, but the Sally has not figured out the 4 Qs yet, but I actually don't know where my dog is. We could make this class final because it hadn't been released in a Drupal release yet. So it was something that we committed and then thought after the fact, like, oh, there's no reason this shouldn't be final. It hadn't been released, so we were free to make it final. So I did some grepping with my limited grep skills, and I found that core had 645 classes marked internal, roughly, but only 23 of these classes, actually that should be final. 23 of these classes actually were final classes. In a perfect world, all these internal classes would also be final. But obviously we don't know how many contrib modules are extending these classes. So we can't really just say, let's go make a patch to make all of our classes that are internal also final. But we could, for an individual module, we could look at, checking my time, for individual module, we could look at to see if we are extending a particular internal class, but we can't, and we could also do that potentially for all of contrib. The upgraded Drupal 9, we relied heavily on building tools that scan the entire contrib space for deprecations, and in some cases provided fixes. We should look for other ways we can make tools that let us make the upgrade process easier and also allow us to reduce our public API. So we potentially could build a bot that would look at all contrib, determine which Drupal core classes that are marked as internal are not being extended. Of course, we're not going to know for custom code. We could create issues for any sites that are using internal code, or we could even provide, right now we don't have tests. If you don't write tests, we don't have any tests that'll run on your module, but we could make tests that run on all modules that would scan for you extending or calling internal classes and notify the maintainers. And we could also add the final warnings about final, that something's going to be final to upgrade status. It would have to be DRP as extension point for the next major because some custom code. Yeah. So I think like we can make tools for contrib and also make tools for custom code so that we could deprecate this in Drupal 9 and then hopefully remove it in Drupal 10. Is this a problem only for extends, implement some other core interfaces? So I don't think it's, yeah, it could be a problem with implementing interfaces that are supposed to be internal too. So we could also look for that. Oh. Yeah, so that is the point of like, but for interfaces, we don't necessarily, if we have an interface, we're kind of saying this is an API. So it's more about classes, yeah. So what else could we do for less work? So you may be saying to yourself, creating bots, rewriting the type data API, and writing docs are great, but what can we do for less work? Let's look at some easier and hopefully painless wins. So of course, no change is painless for everyone, but I think when we're looking at removing complexity and flexibility in Drupal, even if it makes a little simpler for most, it's unfortunately going to cause pain for some, but I think this disruption would be worth it. So how many of you are running your own Drupal update server? So in the chat, if you are running an update server, let me know. I knew Laurie was. So the important question might be, you know, so we're not getting any, oh, I was sort of expecting people to say yes. So currently our update module does not assume that updates.drupal.org is the only update server, when actually the number of sites getting updates from different update servers is probably very low or non-existent. In hindsight, for multiple core version compatibility for modules, we made changes to the expected update XML from Drupal.org that anybody else running an update server would also have to make. We didn't hear from anybody on the issue and who was running an update server, and also we didn't hear after the fact that we had made changes that broke their update server. So this is probably a pretty good indication that almost nobody is doing it, because in hindsight, we probably should have checked on that beforehand, but there you go. But nobody complains, so that is a good sign that probably people aren't doing it. Also, same thing, this is also true of the locale module, though also it's probably not likely people are taking advantage of it. I have more experience with the update module, so I can't say for the locale module. So I suggest that we should probably just remove this functionality, deprecate it in Drupal 9, and try to remove it. So it's actually a small change, would buy us not a ton in complexity, but it will allow us to be more flexible in future changes to the update module and not have to add complexity later on for non-Drupal.org use cases. Although it's a small change, I think it's good practice to allow us to do two things we don't usually do. Actually, I think I'm going to say only one thing. So it would allow us to say no if someone is using the functionality, that removing the functionality would affect them, because it would add more flexibility for people who aren't using it, which would be the vast use case. And I think we need more sort of experience or practice in Drupal saying no, like, I'm sorry you're using this, but we're going to rip it out. So removing, slide is loading. Why do I have a video there? All right, so, oh, this should be just an actual, should not be a video. It should be a, it should just be an image. I don't know why it's loading. Maybe I copy and paste it wrong. Okay, so I've made an issue to remove modules that have less than 5% usage in core. The previous link, the previous module should have, or previous slide should have had a link, but I'm not seeing it now. So the idea here is that we have a lot of modules that don't get a lot of usage. We don't have perfect, or we have very far from perfect usage statistics to tell that, but we have do have some indication that certain modules like book and tracker and forum get very little usage. So I'd like to think we should make a policy to remove modules that have less than 5% usage. And this wouldn't apply to experimental modules because they already have a process for getting removed. And it also wouldn't apply to modules that were introduced in the last version of core. So the idea is if we just added something in Drupal 8, let's not remove it in 9. So let's give it a chance to get usage. And then also don't remove modules that aren't recommended for production usage, because if they're not going to be on production, then yeah, move them to contrib like we did for place block. But I think the important change in a policy like this would not be that we remove particular modules. It would be that we should change the burden from people who want to say we should remove book module from core because, and then list all the reasons. I think instead the burden should be on the people who want to keep something like book module in core. So they should, people who want to advocate, it's not like we could never keep a module that has low usage in core, but we should have to advocate to say, okay, this module should not be removed because X, Y, and Z. We could delete inline editing. I think Sally means quick edit. All right. So I think from Drupal 9 to Drupal 10, we're actually in a better space. In Drupal 8, we introduced modules that had a really complex interaction, layout builder, content moderation, workspaces, and media. And my images aren't showing up for some reason. Let's see if they load. Anyways, this was supposed to be an image of the issue to add translations to layout builder. And that issue involved content translation, config translation, content moderation, layout builder, fields and type data, and access control. So the idea would be that, if you have a layout and you want it to be translated, layout override, you also might be using moderation on that. And you also are probably going to want to translate the defaults. So that gets into a very, very complex use case. And we're this actually is not done, but potentially if we did that and workspaces was also stable, we would also have to factor that in. Yes, you'll have to imagine the slide in your head. Okay. I think with Drupal 9, the new functionality that we're adding in, automatic updates, Olivero, I probably didn't spell that right, and the JS component are potentially things that might be more separated out. I think automatic updates, even though it is really complex, I don't think it's necessarily going to interact that much with the type data API. And that may, depending on how we ship the JS component, that also may be true for the JS component. All right, so I am going to stop for questions. The survey is pinned at the top of the chat. And I'm going to look for questions. I think also if people wanted to jump on the mic, that would also be fine. But Ruth says, to me, this is all about edges of Drupal, which theme mod profile is there easy out compared with the core files. Which theme mod easy in and out compared to contrib load files. Yeah, I kind of agree that this, these aren't the big problems that I'm suggesting fixing, but I think like sort of shifting to the focus is important, and also saying no to certain functionality is important, and kind of will give us practice in that kind of thing, which I don't think we're doing a lot. Product differentiator, imagine the slide. What about adding more modules to core that have really high usage? Yeah, I think, stuff like path auto, I think there are definitely modules that we should add to core. I don't know if in the Drupal 10 timeframe if that's actually going to happen, but I think as we add more stuff to core, it's going to add more complexity, but also it's definitely needed in a lot of cases, because in fact, probably like a case like path auto, probably like almost all sites are already taking on that complexity because they already have it enabled anyways. Does anybody have any other questions or want to jump on thoughts? Maybe remove some themes, looking at 7 and Bartik. Yeah, I kind of feel like I thought there was maybe a path to remove 7 when when the new admin theme comes in, but I have not been following that as much. They're targeted, so Jess says they're targeted for deprecation once Claro and Oliver are stable. Bartik this. Approval. I'm not sure what that means. Anybody, any other questions, or anybody want to jump on a soapbox by sharing your video or sharing your mic? Oh, I see it. Hey, Ruth.
Hiya. I was hoping I could be a little bit more specific about my my concern, which is that if you do take the trouble to step through core Drupal, just going through the initial page request from index PHP onwards, it's a really complicated path, and it may well be the case that that's needed, but my experience to date is that complicated is usually slow and difficult to debug and difficult to maintain. And so in my view, all of this sort of fiddling around about which module we ship with or not, all of that effort will be better put into really trying to pin down what should be in the true core Drupal, not the modules, not the themes, the actual core.
Yeah.
And just see if, in the light of the experience to date, Drupal 10 can actually be even faster and even slicker. Particularly if we're going to JSON API all over the place, where lightning fast APIs will be an absolute necessity.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, but I feel like realistically, like by Drupal 10, it's not going to happen, and a lot of that I feel like affects the easy upgrades path that we were given, or promise that we were given, and I think we have to be really careful of that as far as like losing the community that we have. So it's a mixture, I think, between like technically, like yes, you're right as far as like the optimizations that we could have, but I don't know. I personally don't see it happening, but I'm not saying like, I'm not discouraging anybody from trying.
It's not so much the performance optimization so much, not the, can we shave a microsecond here? It's the architectural optimizations, I'm thinking.
Yeah. Boris.
I'll shut up now.
No, thanks.
So this has been kind of something that I have been asking for a very long time. Chris mentioned in another channel that apparently I've been asking this for 15 years, which is what should Drupal do out of the box? So I just installed a new Drupal 8 yesterday. The core install profiles are trash. They still are undifferentiated for anyone. And so, chiming in with Ruth's like Drupal as core library, amazing. Mm-hmm. And then our question becomes, okay, is this for site builders? Are we right now, Drupal out of the box is a box of Legos. We can argue which Legos go in the box, but even there, like Ruth is saying, like, if we smooth how the Legos go, so you can make a spaceship for JSON API out of the box, that's very different than Foxglove Terrace Site Builders Club, who are building small business restaurant sites. And we have to decide where we fit in there. And saying we can't make it in a certain time frame is essentially just saying we're choosing not to do this at all. We're punting.
Well, we're choosing to not have Symfony, like us lose Symfony security coverage.
I'm not saying that. I know what you mean, trade-offs of budget and time-wise.
Yeah.
But the real challenge is when we say like upgrade paths and other things like that, how many new users are we losing by not making choices of out of the box, or not being an amazing JSON API structure editor out of the box so that you can drop in your Gatsby or your React. And that lens is going to end up with a very different core than a site builder distribution. We can, in fact, do both by choosing to improve distributions and site building and install profiles.
Okay.
Would it be possible to pull in the components of current Drupal, but put them in a different arrangement to make a Drupal light?
Yeah, I mean, we could do composer subsplits and make everything sort of
There's some components already coming out, right?
Yeah.
So there are pieces of Drupal coming out using this split methodology where it pushes it out to another repo. If you look on like packages, there's a number of libraries that came out. So I think that's really a good path to go. And I think, you know, Ted's coming from a different place. He's like defending all of Drupal. But this, you know, the complaints are kind of valid. You know, if you look at some of these cool frameworks like Laravel and Symfony, they're jumping ahead because they're so simple. And so I think it's more. I think the biggest thing is that there is a lot of kind of conservative, be careful planning for Drupal. I think, like, there's so much value in the CMS side that the corporate, like, you don't hear at DrupalCon what the big 5-year vision is, right? So it's hard. There isn't really a clear longer term target, I think, is what we're saying. Like it would be nice to say, like you said, oh, I don't think it's going to happen for 10, but maybe that's because 10 is coming next year, maybe 11 and 12. So I think it's.
But I mean, I also think we pushed hard on the JSON, the admin UI initiative, and I think, you know, it's not like people haven't been pushing in that area. But
yeah, well, I you know what I mean. Like Boris here makes me flash back 15 years to seeing the name.
I mean, JSON API. Something that I realized in the last couple of days is that we use lots of different labels for front end devs. A Drupal install is a build your own GraphQL endpoint. Without Drupal,
for like a JavaScript dev,
Without Drupal. Oh my God, you are giving me a point-and-click interface to build my own API? There's entire hosted companies that build. That's Firebase. Google Firebase competes with a base install of Drupal. That's freaking amazing. Drupal people don't see that.
Make that clear.
I mean, I also think
shout about that.
I see that point, but I also see the fact that something hasn't been made like this in the JavaScript community, like the data modeling through the UI and all that. I think we can not think that maybe it's because people don't want it. I don't think everybody wants what we have. I think people like making data models in code.
So this is a yes and. So I'm saying this. So front end devs do not think that they can create APIs. Just like 15 years ago, people didn't think they could have a personalized CMS and community site in a box.
Yeah.
Right.
But also, I think even if people want it, like if we pivot to make it, I don't think it's a definite that by the time we make it, other people
it does
have
it
already
today.
made it better.
Drupal does it today. If you build content types, they're exposed in a JSON API automatically.
Yeah, I know.
So anyway, I think what's going to happen is like some genius is going to start tinkering with core and just pull out Node and just be like, here's Drupal/Node. And it's just a fork of Drupal with the slight changes needed as a proof of concept, right? Because like it's such a big problem. It's hard to imagine like it coming from the top down. But
I mean,
if you could pull out user, like Drupal/user.
Are the three of y'all using Contenta?
Not specifically, but I've done a lot of GraphQL, like content API stuff for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we do have there's a decoupled distribution that I feel like if people got behind, and it got a lot of motion, then this stuff could happen. But
that's why I think it's going to come from the community, really.
Yeah.
Because it's very hard. It's a very big refactoring, but I think it's possible. I mean, even getting the subtree split thing, people thought was never going to happen, and getting core as getting Drupal into Composer was people were like, how's that going to work 5 years ago? But
I think this comes back to like from the community and other things. Like I think there's this discussion of core where if stuff gets into core or goes out of core, it does automatically get maintained or not maintained, and certain entities put resources towards it or not. So if we actually look at that and say, okay, who is the lead maintainer for each out of the box aspect of Drupal? Is there a maintainer for each of those?
No.
Yeah, there's not for a lot.
Right, and so that's in the same way. So can we make, instead of just saying if we kick it out to a distribution to Contenta, then Contenta moves at the movement it can move under its brand and everything else like that. So how do we do yes and say this is what Drupal core is going to do? We are going to highlight certain distributions in a certain way with the full might of Drupal at this level.
I mean, I think that is one problem, is that we don't highlight. There's not like we have contrib and it's all the same. And I think we haven't made the choice to say, let's highlight certain stuff or let's highlight certain distributions. And I don't know. I haven't been pushing on that, but I think that would be huge.
Even core, define core. It's like, the Drupal's powerful to the programmer because the stacks are so well thought through, and the user log, everything, access control, the user logins. But then it's like, oh, blog, like blog out of the box and whatever. And so that's considered core, but it's like, that's really like a great implementation of the core tools.
Yeah.
So maybe like just kind of at some point we got to start to really push on that. Even when remember when profiles first came out, we were like, that's going to solve all our problems. But like, I guess it just didn't really fully get realized, because it is complicated and hard. But maybe at some point. Sorry.
Is it worth considering the model that Ubuntu uses of having the core repositories, the packages, and then you've got universe and multiverse. You've got that kind of model of. And it's not really saying that, people. I think people understand that they're not saying those packages are crap. They're just saying they're not what we are curating.
Yeah. That's a good example. Linux itself, Red Hat. I mean, they figured it out, like channels, and let people add their own repos and like create a system where you can have the core trust, but then you have the ability to kind of add trusted systems to that kind of source distributor, basically. But anyway, I think Ted, like we're just kind of, there needs to be a little bit of leadership to like push the big ideas forward instead of it's great and we've made a lot of progress over the years, but these are big questions, and it's like I'm not asking you to do it. Get out. Come on, man.
I'm not. I guess I'm not against all of these things, but I think the idea of like docs for the docs for like our subsystems. It's like, if we're going to do all this decoupling and sort of make everything modular, are you going to do that before the type data system has good docs? We're just going to document that later, some other time. You're going to trust it's going to happen once everything is spit out.
It's Drupal. It's all about the experimenters, and then then it comes back into the corporate hands, and they make sure it's long term. So, I don't know. We're in a new era, and honestly, with 8 and 9, and now this staggered release thing, I feel like maybe the doors are open for innovation in that level. So, all
right. Ron's jumping in. I don't know when we get kicked.
You don't actually get kicked. It'll stop recording, and you can reload the page, and the room stays open forever.
I thought Ron Northcutt asked to be in. I thought I pressed plus, but I don't see him. So
thanks for letting me rant, John. Lovely to see you.
It was good to meet you face to face for once.
Ron,
welcome back. Ron.
Tell us what
I think it was Damien mentioned the packages, distributions as being like a composer package.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ron probably wanted to talk about something.
No, I just wanted to cycle back from a big level to what Dries was talking about in the Dries note, looking forward. And I think to your point, John, about this opportunity where we finally got, semantic versioning. We finally got some really big things like JSON API and views and core. We finally gotten an upgrade path that doesn't mean rebuilding every single time. And we got this really short window of 2 years before we get to 10. And it feels like we're starting this whole new level of Drupal's evolution. And for those of us that have been around for a long time, we've seen how not only has Drupal evolved and, at least from my perspective, really stayed relevant by being willing to change and adapt to the times, we've also seen, Drop's always moving, we've also seen how, as the rest of technology has evolved, especially folks that are newer in the industry or age myself a bit younger, not necessarily coming on board because PHP is old and Drupal is old. My big point here is that I think Dree's looking forward and saying, okay, how can we continue to adapt and evolve and not only stay relevant, but also really use this incredible framework and community to drive innovation, to do things easier and faster that other people aren't thinking of or can't do. Again, hearkening back to the GraphQL discussion earlier. So at the big level, I think that's that type of vision that he continues to outline and he's often very correct about is the kind of thing we need to be looking at as a community and trying to come together and say, okay, we see where we need to be, we see where we need to go, and now what are the things that we have to do individually and as a group to get there? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard. It's hard with the. I think it's a fine line between like getting new people and not losing old people, and not old, existing. Let's say existing people.
It's okay. I'm old. I'll claim it. It's fine.
But,
yeah. Well, I think that there are so many projects and so many little niche things. Decoupled stuff, JavaScript stuff specifically. I came into this DrupalCon with some pretty set ideas on how I think things should be and some stuff that I've worked on, and I have felt pretty knowledgeable about this space. And then every single day I'm finding something else that I didn't know. Another project that's out there that I can't believe hasn't been, that I hadn't seen, or multiple projects solving the same problem that evolved in isolation, but ended up in almost the same place with the same approaches, which indicates that is a good thing to do. So then the question becomes, okay, so how do we find that consensus and work towards, obviously there's a need for that. Does that go in core? Is there some type of like community contrib space we need to create? I don't know. It's just, it's a challenge when you've got this many people and this many folks working, and a lot of really, really smart people solving problems and kind of reinventing the wheel, which is a good thing. But then how do we kind of find a time to kind of pull those things together so we can have some unity? Pretty difficult thing.
I'm going to drop because it's been a long day and I need a break, but I assume if I drop, people can stay.
Thank you for the talk, Ted.
Thanks a lot, y'all.
Good job.
Right.
Well done, Ted,
Thanks.
as usual.
Bye.